The 911 call was chilling. The man's voice trembled with urgency, not because of an intruder or a burglar, but because of what he called a demon. He begged the officers to come quickly. "It's here. It knows I told you. Please, arrest it before it makes me do something horrible." Minutes later, when officers arrived, they found the man dead by his own hand, yet there was no sign of any other presence in the room. What followed unraveled into a web of psychological torment, buried secrets, and a mystery that still has seasoned investigators whispering about the demon case. He had always been quiet, a little withdrawn, but no one had ever described him as unstable. People who knew him, his co-workers at the hardware store, the girl he dated on and off for a year, the elderly couple next door, all agreed he was polite, responsible, and kept to himself. But something began to shift about 3 weeks before his death. It started small. He began missing work, claiming he had caught the flu. Then he started turning off his phone for long periods, even going days without answering texts or calls. When his girlfriend finally showed up at his apartment unannounced, she found him disheveled, staring at a blank television screen, saying he couldn't sleep because it watched him through the static. That night, she stayed with him, more out of concern than affection. She thought he was having a breakdown, maybe too much stress, maybe drugs. But the apartment didn't smell like weed or alcohol. There were no pills. Just dozens of crumpled pages in the trash with frantic scribbles. Symbols, diagrams, notes. One line repeated more than once read, "It knows when I see it." Another read, "The more I notice it, the closer it comes." When she tried to confront him, he simply whispered, "It's not always there, but when it is, I can't breathe." Over the next several days, things escalated. He didn't just hear noises, he saw figures. He swore that shadows moved when he wasn't looking, that the corners of his room were darker than they should be. He unplugged all the lights in his apartment and started using only candles, saying the thing could hide in electricity. He stopped sleeping altogether. Neighbors began hearing pacing at all hours of the night, sometimes loud banging or muffled screaming. They called the landlord once, but nothing came of it. He told one of them that he was trying to protect everyone in the building, that he was holding it back. Then came the cameras. He bought 6 of them, cheap, motion-detecting webcams from an electronics store, and mounted them in each room of the apartment. Every night he would sit in front of his laptop and watch the live feeds. He told the same girlfriend, who kept checking in despite their strained relationship, that the demon only appeared when no one else was around. He said he had seen it twice just out of frame, a blurred shape like a man crawling backward across the ceiling, or a face peeking from behind the refrigerator. But the footage never showed anything. The feeds either cut out, glitched, or became corrupted at the same times he claimed the thing was visible. She urged him to see someone, and to her surprise he agreed. But when he met with a local therapist, the session reportedly ended early. He became agitated when the therapist asked about hallucinations and screamed, "You think it's in my head, but it's real. It's older than this building. It was here before I moved in. I didn't bring it, it found me." He left abruptly and never returned. Around that time he began showing up at the local police station. Officers later testified that he wasn't violent or disruptive, just desperate. He kept insisting that someone was after him, but he never used the word person. He said it was stalking him, hiding in his apartment, that it had no face but smiled. The reports were written off as mental health concerns. The officers gave him hotline numbers and urged him to check into a hospital. One officer recalled weeks later that after one of those visits she walked him to his car, and just before getting in he turned and said, "If I kill myself, it's because I lost. You have to tell them that. I didn't do it, I lost." His journals, which police recovered after his death, documented the spiral in agonizing detail. The entries became more frantic, the handwriting messier with each passing day. One page simply had a circle drawn over and over until it tore through the paper. On another he wrote, "It's learning. It speaks in thoughts. It tells me I'm wrong. It tells me no one will believe me because no one sees it like I do." He sketched crude figures, twisted silhouettes, some with gaping mouths, others entirely black. But the most chilling entry came just 3 days before his final 911 call. It read, "I gave it a name last night. Like that. Now it follows faster. I shouldn't have given it a name." The tipping point came when he claimed it had begun touching him. He described cold, numb sensations along his neck, his spine. Sometimes he'd wake up with bruises or scratches he couldn't explain. One morning he called his ex, sobbing uncontrollably, and said, "It's inside me now. I think it's in my head." She tried to call emergency services, but he refused to give his location. That same night, Neighbors said they heard something crash, glass shattering, then silence. When he showed up at the police station again, this time around midnight, his face was pale, his eyes sunken, and his hands trembled. He handed one of the officers a USB stick and said, "This is all I could capture. Please watch it if I don't make it." That stick would later contain hours of blank or corrupted footage, except for a single still image from the living room camera, showing what looked like a figure made of static, standing behind the man as he sat on the couch. The timestamp was 2 hours before his death. This was the last documented public appearance of the man. 2 nights later he made the call that would leave authorities, and the internet, forever haunted. The call came in at exactly 2:16 a.m. The dispatcher's log initially marked it as a possible break-in, but within moments, it became something else entirely. The caller's voice was frantic, fragmented by heavy breathing and sobs. "Please," he gasped. "You need to come. It's here. I locked it in the bathroom, but it's not staying in there." The dispatcher asked if someone had broken in. He said no. It didn't break in. It's always been here. It just decided to show itself tonight. There was a long pause. Then he whispered, "Please? You need to arrest the demon." The dispatcher tried to get clarification. Was this someone he knew? Was it a person or an animal? But every time she tried to bring him back to rationality, his voice would rise, shaking. "Don't let it talk to you. Lies. If you hear it, you won't be able to stop it." There was a loud bang like something falling. He screamed again, begged the dispatcher to hurry, said he couldn't look at it anymore. "I can see its mouth move, but there's no sound. It's smiling. It's always smiling." Officers arrived at the apartment just under 7 minutes later. The front door was unlocked, but the lights inside were off. The apartment smelled of burnt plastic and something else, something coppery and sharp. One officer later reported a strange sensation as he stepped inside. It was like walking into a vacuum. All the air felt wrong, heavy. They called out, identifying themselves, and slowly swept the room. The living area was empty. The kitchen was dark. All the windows were covered with thick black cloth nailed into the walls. They followed the sound of a slow creaking, something moving in the hallway. At the end of the hall, they found the bathroom door closed. A chair had been shoved under the knob, like someone had tried to barricade it from the outside. But when they moved the chair and opened the door, the bathroom was empty. No sign of struggle, no sign of anyone hiding, nothing. The mirror had been shattered from the inside out. Pieces of glass lay in the sink, the tub, and scattered across the tile floor. One officer knelt to inspect them and noticed a small, smudged handprint, not on the glass but high up on the mirror frame. Too high for someone of average height to reach without climbing. But there was no stool or anything in sight that could have been used to stand on. Then they heard the sound, a faint thud from the bedroom. When they entered, the man was already gone. He was slumped on the floor beside the bed, a handgun still loosely in his grip, blood pooled beneath him. A single shot through the roof of his mouth. The scene was clean, no sign of a struggle, no other weapons, no note. But what chilled them wasn't just the body. It was the wall across from where he died. The wall was bare except for a large mirror. Scrawled across its cracked surface in a dark ashy substance was one word: obey. There was no evidence of what it was written with. No charcoal, no marker, no ash. Just the word, smeared in a jagged, frantic script, as if by someone who had used their own fingers. Forensics could not identify the substance. Later analysis of the 911 call revealed background sounds most wouldn't notice. Amidst his pleas and cries, there was a second voice, low, garbled, and indecipherable. Audio experts enhanced the call. What they found disturbed even the most skeptical officers. There were syllables buried under his screaming, too distorted to form real words but consistent in rhythm and tone. A voice speaking over his own. Some described it as chanting. Others said it sounded like laughing. The officers who responded to the scene were interviewed multiple times. Most stuck to the facts. But one, who later resigned without explanation, admitted during a private session that the mirror had unsettled him more than the body. He said when he looked at the reflection he saw something that didn't match reality. The bedroom behind him looked the same, but the walls seemed to breathe, and for a second, just a second, he thought he saw the man standing in the reflection, still alive, with something black and shapeless looming behind him. The apartment was sealed off that same night. Neighbors were told it was a suicide, and for all official records that was true. But the officers couldn't shake what they'd witnessed. Most of them never went back inside. The evidence was sparse. There was no sign of anyone else being in the apartment. No forced entry. No fingerprints besides the victims. No surveillance footage that captured anything unusual. Just the 911 call, the cryptic word on the mirror, and the growing number of people, both officers and civilians, who admitted they couldn't sleep after hearing the recording. The girlfriend was contacted the next day. She broke down when she heard what happened. She told investigators about the USB drive he had left at the station days earlier. Inside it was hours of footage from the home cameras, almost all of it empty. Except one clip. A still image captured in the dead of night, 2 hours before he died. He was sitting on the edge of the couch, staring forward. And behind him, barely visible in the shadows of the hallway, was a shape. Human-like but not. His limbs were too long. Its face was featureless. And it seemed to be leaning forward as if whispering in his ear. No one could explain the image. Forensics couldn't enhance it enough to say it was a person. Digital experts couldn't find signs of manipulation. But every person who saw the image reported feeling cold, even when looking at it on their phones or printed copies. Some claimed they saw it blink when they looked too long. The official report concluded mental illness, likely undiagnosed schizophrenia, as the cause of death. But those involved in the case weren't satisfied. Too many unexplained elements. Too much fear and too many people who had never met the victim. And always that lingering question, what if he was telling the truth? In the days that followed the man's death, the case quietly circulated through police stations and online forums alike, not because of the suicide but because of everything that surrounded it. Investigators, desperate to bring closure, began looking into his background, hoping to find a thread of sanity they could pull. But what they found only deepened the mystery. The journals he left behind were more than paranoid scribblings. They were detailed, methodical, even organized in parts. He had divided his entries into segments, tracking when the presence appeared, noting what he heard, how long it stayed, how it seemed to react to light, sound, and even emotions. Some pages read like a scientific log. He wrote that the entity responded more violently when he tried to ignore it, that it would vanish when others were near but return the moment he was alone. One entry noted, "It rewards attention. That's how it grows stronger. It needs my fear like breath." The most chilling entries described dreams, dark corridors, endless hallways filled with mirrors that didn't reflect his body but instead showed versions of the demon wearing his face. "I see it now," he wrote. "Everywhere. In reflections, in corners, behind blinking lights. It becomes what I am most afraid of, and right now, that's me." One dream repeated across several entries involved him being locked in a room with hundreds of others, none of whom had eyes. They all whispered the same phrase, "It spoke to us and now we belong to it." The therapist he'd seen only once, a local counselor known for helping with trauma cases, came forward with a written statement. She said he was frightened beyond reason. Not confused, frightened. She emphasized that his delusions were not disjointed, not the typical random associations of schizophrenia. His story, however strange, had a terrifying consistency. He believed, deeply and with absolute conviction, that something had attached itself to him. He described it not as a ghost or demon in the religious sense, but as a thing that hijacked meaning, used human perception against itself. It wasn't haunting him. It was mimicking belief. This detail became important. Investigators dug into the building's history and learned of a suicide nearly 20 years earlier in the same apartment. A man in his 30s, similarly unknown to law enforcement or psychiatric institutions, had barricaded himself inside and was found dead with no note, only strange markings on the wall made with his own blood. The markings were dismissed at the time as signs of psychosis. No link had ever been made until now. The original case files were sparse, but one detail stood out. That earlier victim had also told neighbors in his final days that something was inhabiting the silence in his home. One neighbor remembered being told not to look too long at the mirrors, or it would learn their face. When these stories resurfaced, they seemed too close to the recent case to be coincidence. Digital experts then analyzed the still image from the USB stick. The figure in the background wasn't easily dismissed as a trick of light. The hallway in which it stood was too dark for a normal shadow to take such a shape. Using color analysis and image mapping, they determined that the figure absorbed light differently than the environment around it, meaning it was likely not a part of the room's normal layout. Still, without clear proof of tampering or a third party, there was no logical explanation. As online interest grew, so did speculation. Forums and YouTube videos began referring to the entity as the smiling thing. Theories ranged from tulpa-like mental projections to interdimensional parasites that fed off belief. One Reddit user claimed to have lived in the building 5 years earlier and experienced similar sensations. Unexplained sleep paralysis, a figure standing just out of reach, whispers behind bathroom doors. Another said their brother had a breakdown after visiting a friend in that apartment and never recovered. Though unverifiable, the volume of similar claims couldn't be ignored. The building itself eventually became a focus. Records showed it had changed ownership 6 times in the last 30 years. Complaints of strange electrical problems, mirrors shattering without cause, and persistent feelings of unease filled old maintenance logs. Yet no tenants had ever stayed long enough to push for an investigation. Some neighbors began to express fear. One elderly resident claimed she never looked at her own reflection after dark, and that she heard someone pacing in the apartment after it had been sealed. She lived directly below. Eventually, authorities closed off the apartment permanently, citing ongoing structural hazards. But privately, some officers admitted the decision was driven by something less tangible. One of the original responders had developed intense insomnia and paranoia. Another reported hearing whispers in his home when alone, echoing the same words the man had uttered in his final call. "It's right in front of me." The case was closed with a final ruling of suicide due to mental illness. But few involved believed that fully explained what had happened. The word obey on the mirror, written in an unknown substance, was never matched to any known compound. The origin of the audio distortions on the 911 tape remained unexplained. And the image, the figure behind him, continues to circulate on conspiracy forums, each poster offering their interpretation, each convinced the image holds some terrible truth just beyond perception. There is a silence around this case, but not a peaceful one. It's the kind of silence that feels like it's listening. And for those who peer too long into it, into the mirror, into the pixelated blur of the still frame, there's a lingering question that refuses to go away. What if he was right? What if the real danger wasn't what he saw, but what followed those who tried to understand it?